My name is Lottie Summers and I'm the Community Hub Assistant at Halesowen College. The University Centre that we're running these talks through began in January 2020 in partnership with the University of Worcester. We'll be putting on a free lecture each month around various different topics, and we hope that the lectures will inspire you to consider higher education. Our lecture today is by Dr. Barbara Mitra on social media and body image. We'll hand over to Barbara shortly, but first I wanted to go over some housekeeping for the event today. Hopefully, as you've joined, you notice that cameras and microphones are switched off. Please continue to be muted throughout the lecture so we don't have any background noise that could interrupt the talk. If you have any questions for Barbara about the topic, then I encourage you to use the chat box. And at the end, we'll do a short Q&A. At the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a purple tab with arrows. And once you click this, you will see the chat window. I will then monitor that throughout the lecture. So without further ado, I will hand over to Barbara.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm hoping to make this a little bit interactive. So I'm hoping that at some points you will either be able to click on poll, so there's a little link to a poll that I might use, or indeed the whiteboard. So hopefully it'll be a little bit interactive, but let me just start from, here we go. So as Lottie just said, I'm Dr. Barbara Mitra and I have worked at the University of Worcester for quite a while, and my research interests tend to focus on gender, particularly gender, body image. I'm doing some research on eating disorders as well on social media. So I'm moving into this whole kind of social media sphere. So I'm just going to start with some statistics. Okay, so this was a poll done by the Mental Health Foundation UK, and they found that 31% of the 1,000 teenagers that they interviewed felt ashamed of their body image, and 40% of teenagers noted that images on social media caused them to worry about their body image. And the Priory Group, who you might have heard of, have warned about the rise of eating disorders and fitspiration posts on Instagram. So I conducted some interviews with teenagers about their viewpoints, and one of the things that came out was this focus on looks, particularly for males and females and, you know, however people identify, so non-binary or whatever, but this focus on looks seems to be really important. So I am going to start with a little question for you. So in the chat, if you want to just write yes or no to this question here, do you think social media influences you? So I can see some yeses coming in. Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Zara, when you had it. Yep, yep. Anybody say no? Or think they're not as influenced? Oh, that's interesting. Sometimes when I ask this, I have a few no's, but not, yep, not so much today. But that's interesting because that's what we're going to explore. So the research I did, for example, Dawn, who was 14, all the names have been changed, by the way. Yeah, and yes, this idea of whether it's age, whether it's younger people, is something that we kind of you often hear people saying that other people are affected, but we'll come back to this. So Dawn, who was 14, said 80% of the people she knows worry about how they look. So let me move on. So this idea of social media, it suggested, provides discourse of the self. So for lots of young people, having a presence on social media is important. And You know, you can think about how long you've spent maybe on social media today, perhaps already. So the images, though, that tend to dominate tend to be ones that often conform to those socially acceptable standards and norms. So this idea of perfect bodies, perfect lives, and perfect relationships. And as this quote says, omnipresent, available anytime and anywhere. So social media then being available, and these images are often generated by users, and that's really important because that's one of the differences between traditional media and social media, that actually it's often ourselves generating some of these images. So a couple of, or Ben here, one of the quotes said, social media like Instagram make you portray another side of yourself. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on. I'm going to try and see if I can get a few of you to interact now with either the poll or the, or what should we do? Let's try the poll. So if I click off here and go to my little VVox poll, and I'm just going to open this poll and I will put the little link here in the chat for you. That's come up. So how many hours have you spent on social media today already? Oh, and I have to just click this so I can see the results. Yep, 2 hours, 3 hours, none, somebody said. Yeah, and that's interesting. I come to that at the very end, this idea of none. So some have spent quite a lot of time, you know, 6 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour. Yeah, one. So yeah, if this doesn't work for you, you can always put it in the chat as well. Brilliant. So that's really interesting. The average response at the moment is 2.75 hours. It's been too busy. Yep, 0. So again, interesting. The average 2.75. So some have not spent a long time, some have spent quite a long time, but the average couple of hours maybe, and maybe in the evening as well. So 2 hours already. So right, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so I do talk about body positivity in a minute as well, but social media encourages people to see their bodies as objects to be gazed upon. So this idea of a male gaze. Have you heard of this? This idea of a male gaze? If I put Mulvey in here, is this name familiar? So some saying yes and some saying no. Yeah. So for those that haven't heard of, yep, internalized male gaze. Yeah. So this idea of the male gaze is where women particularly, and I come to the female gaze in a bit, but where women particularly get used to seeing themselves from a male viewpoint. And not only is it women seeing themselves from a male viewpoint, but then women start to judge other women by that male viewpoint, if you like. So this is where you get people saying, oh, look at her, you know, she looks like, you know, this is the male gaze that focuses very much on looks and body image. So body image is about an internal perception of our physical appearance, and it's based on the reactions that we get from others as well to ourselves. And of course, social media provides a whole arena for this to happen. And we become used to comparing ourselves to others. And some argue that this has always happened to some extent. However, I think on social media it's exaggerated because it is such a social medium with physical appearance and the visual seems to dominate. So social media also encourages expressions of ourselves, so it can inform, reinforce and instigate ideas about the body and about appearance and about how we should look. So upward comparisons are ones where images and posts are perceived better than oneself, and this is where we feel worse about our bodies. We feel a bit dissatisfied with how we look. Downward social comparison is where posts and images are perceived as worse than oneself, and actually that might make us feel better. So research suggests that the upward comparison, this first one here, is much more common, and that women are much more likely to see themselves from others' viewpoints. I do talk about males in a minute as well. So social comparison theory is about ranking oneself against others, particularly in relation to physical appearance. So the focus can be on appearance, and that can become central to definitions of ourselves. So this comment here from Amanda, and again, these names have all been changed, but you see a picture and you immediately think I should look like that, even though it doesn't look like a person. So we know they've been photoshopped and edited, but it still kind of influences us. So Dancer 18, who says she hates her body, says all ballerinas have some sort of body dysmorphia. What do you think about this? I might just share the whiteboard and you can then just put up any comments you want. So if I toggle back to that, oh, it's gone again. Let me just toggle back to my. Yeah, so some of the chats, let me share the whiteboard and see if it works. So yeah, any comments that you want to put in the chat or here. So somebody said, do we think this differs from print magazine as the moral panic re-anorexia in mags? Yeah, I mean, I suppose the point about the social media, there's a couple of points. One is I come on to this idea of influencers and how we have a relationship with them that's slightly different. But also I think because we also circulate the images, whereas traditional media, it is just magazines and traditional media that's doing it. So whether that's TV or films, video games, whereas now we're also participating. And as somebody said, those with ideal body image. Yeah, and this idea of a distorted body image. So I'm just going to share my screen again with the ballerina. So some interesting comments. Just click on the comment box. So Instagram, for example, perfect bodies, perfect lives, and perfect relationships. And as somebody mentioned, magazines, the images that are circulated can be adopted, can be adopted from mainstream media. Yeah, and social media generates stuff we've searched before. So yeah, all the algorithms as well. Where the images are idealized and photoshopped, yeah, and definitely the algorithms and search history, as somebody's put in the chat. But this idea that they're idealized and photoshopped can also contribute to feelings of inadequacy. And this can be reinforced by messages of approval or disapproval, such as comments, likes, engagement from others. And this is what makes it different to the magazines as well, because if you're getting lots and lots of likes on, look at my image, I've been to the gym, for example, it can reinforce the unattainable image as something to strive for. And so you had Catherine here, who was 17, who commented, I always get worried if I want to post a picture of myself on social media because it has to be like a really good picture or I won't post it. Yeah, and as somebody's commented, we change our bodies and sell them to others through image sharing and participate in sort of a hall of mirrors. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's this norm that goes around then, that is reinforced by others. Do you post up pictures of yourself? Never. And that's interesting as well. No. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, recently stopped. And that's the interesting bit in my, filtered. Yeah, yeah, no. Younger, now actively try to share more authentic photos. Yeah, yeah. Only the ones I like. Yeah, that's interesting. So some interesting comments there, and we come back to this as well. Yep, yeah, the ones I like again. So, oh, I haven't moved it on. Here we go. Yes, and body shaming, shaming in images of bodies. Yeah, and this is kind of I know I was just looking at one of my or writing a lecture for some of my students on thinking about shame and body image, actually, which is quite a powerful emotion, this whole idea of shame. I'm going to talk about women first, and then I'm going to talk about men. So the image for women tends to be, and these are the ones that often dominate, and I will talk about body positivity in a bit as well, but the ones that dominate tend to be sleek, slender images of female beauty. Yeah, and often with thin, largely unattainable beauty ideals. So women are inundated with powerful messages that emphasize an ideal body as lean and thin. And yes, whilst there have been changes, so some mention the Kardashians when I talk about this, so it might be more curvaceous, but the thin waist is something that seems to remain constant. And the messages then insist that the female body is in need of control to be acceptable in society. So, like you have Abigail here, and again, these names have all been changed, who was 14, who said, I wouldn't say there's pressure to be like mega thin, but like slim or not overweight. And then, of course, I don't know if you've heard about the corset that's is come back into fashion. And one of the posts I was reading said that you can do up more hooks as you lose more weight, and they were seeing how many hooks they could do up each week. Let me see if my other little Vox poll is oops, sorry, let me go to my Vox poll and see what you think about this. So, any comments about the corset? Yes, waist training. Yeah, and that's exactly what it was called, waist training. You know, which is here we go, comments about the corset. So you can either put it in the chat or on the whiteboard. The whiteboard is anonymous, by the way. So any comments here, you know, if anybody does want to comment. Yep, waist training, just the same old stuff since medieval age. And it's crazy that it's come back in, I think. But, you know, and it just emphasizes yeah. Yes, and actually, I've got a nice little post of a male asking about the corset, the waist corset, and you know, wanting a thinner waist as well. So anthropologists would say linked to fertility and hip waist ratio. Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I like the look of them. I always wanted to try one because everyone else is doing it. Yeah, and that's part of the whole thing, isn't it? Is that what circulates seems to reinforce things on social media. And this is my argument, particularly about body image. Yeah, and yeah, this is the point, you know, helping us to look slim. Yeah, yeah, and some so somebody's got one, and somebody has one because they're ashamed of their body. So you know, which again, this reinforces how we're made to feel. So if we're confident about our bodies, that's you know that. But if we're made to do that comparison that makes us unconfident and feel that we need to change, is what I'm kind of trying to argue against. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and this idea that actually, it's where our self-esteem comes from. I mean, that's the issue for me. Some curvaceous bodies with slim waists are from surgery. Yeah, corsets are a way to monetize a desire for this image who cannot afford to go under knife. Yeah, and of course, yeah, the whole cosmetic surgery industry is about body image. And somebody's yeah, contrast between the small waist and contrasting with other things in songs as well as images. Yeah, and the queer trans culture and burlesque be a way to play or queer the Kardashian image. Yeah, and that's interesting. And then making them more commercial to audiences. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Thank you for participating. I will go back to my PowerPoint. Some interesting comments from you guys there. And of course, I suppose you could wear it in a rebellious way. So, yeah, and health, yeah, and I come back to this. So some research found that these comparisons happen at a subconscious level, and that this is why it might be more difficult to control. So Kath, who was 17, said everyone wants to be skinny, and there's, oh, I've lost so much weight. And then exposure to media messages can impart expectations in relation to looks and body image. And I suppose for me, really, it's about where self-esteem comes from, and, you know, why is it just based on how one looks? There is, however, growing concern regarding body image disturbances for males, with young men becoming increasingly body conscious. Yeah, and I've got a nice, yeah, that's interesting, Janie. I've got a really nice little comment coming up to do with how somebody's looks. And yeah, saying they haven't, yeah, good point about yeah, taking steroids. And in fact, the Priory, when I was doing some of this research, noted that a male who was 11 was taking steroids because he wanted bigger muscles. You know, and obviously the body isn't developed at that age, and it can do quite a lot of harm. So the concern for males is particularly on muscularity and this increasing body consciousness as well. But at the same time, there tends to be slightly more variations of body types for males. So whilst you have this focus on wide shoulders, well-developed chests, arm muscles, and a kind of ripped muscularity, there's also kind of more variations and versions of masculinities that are acceptable compared with a very narrow version of femininity. Yep, and somebody said, yeah, that YouTubers, you know, some make a living from talking about their acne and skin and things. So yeah, so I suppose it's what dominates as well is interesting, and what we go to, you know, and that's often we find ourselves in our echo chambers. So, you know, what we go to and to look at, which I come back to at the end actually. So there are more versions of masculinities compared with the idealized version of femininity. And a couple of comments from the research that I did. So you have Christian here saying, I think you see other guys online and the way they are, I think it has an impact. And I suppose one of the things then that gets us to think about is whether the male gaze and the female gaze are equal. And if not, what is going on? So what do you think? Is it equal, the male gaze, the female gaze? Yeah, the male beauty. Well, actually, interestingly, the male market started with kind of body creams and perfumes, and you know, in the 80s they realized this was a bit of a market. But I think you're right, there's still more. So cosmetics particularly started to be marketed in the 80s towards men because they realized it was a big market they were missing out on. But hair grooming products are fairly popular. But yeah, you're right, it's a huge market, definitely. So I suppose what I'm getting to in terms of the male gaze that has been around, and some of you mentioned Mulvey, this idea of women being objectified has been around for ages. And some of the arguments suggest that the female gaze, where women are looking at men's bodies in a similar way, is the same. But actually, one thing that's different is this word here, power. The male gaze is what's called hegemonic. Yeah, and the female gaze is on the rise, but some argue. So, well, the debates around it is whether it's equal to the male gaze or not. And some argue that because masculinity is, like, if you like, at the top of the hierarchy, that it's still not equal. So it's there's increasing concern about male bodies, but some debates suggest it's not quite the same in terms of the bodies for males. Yeah, and exactly, you could argue that. So women have greater socio-cultural pressures, some argue, in relation to appearance and conforming to the norms. And talking to my students, actually, what they suggest is that males are less likely to talk about the pressure that they feel. Rather, so if males do feel under pressure to look a certain way, don't know, what do you think? Do you agree? Oh, you've all gone quiet now. Yeah. Yeah, some saying, yeah, you agree. Yeah. So actually, it might be the case that males are just less likely to want to admit to the pressure that they're feeling, and to maybe less likely to talk about it. So women are much more used to engaging in appearance comparisons as well, and some argue find it harder to resist these messages. So these two quotes highlight some of this. So Dawn, who was 14, said, I'd say there's more pressure on women to be thin than there is on men to be muscly. Yeah, so men are their main hobbies and cultural interests. Women are a bag of problems, often, and surprised to find they are not their hobbies like, oh, they're not their hobbies like for men. Dad bod is the backlash. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that, dad bod. Yeah, it is, isn't it? So this whole focus on the body is I suppose what I'm kind of interested in, and I come to eating disorders in a minute, but as well as body positivity. Yeah, just as much pressure on men than women, but men are less likely to talk about it, maybe. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I suppose that the more effort to meet the female standards is what Zara is maybe saying here. And again, these names have been changed, so um, so this participant said girls have to think about their hair and their makeup, but boys, all they have to really care about is their hair, and that's it. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So yeah. So spending more money. Yeah, that's some really interesting. So, and it links to identity, and identity, I suppose, is one of the key things that I'm interested in. One of the key things I explore in my course actually as well. So yeah, and I'd say it's much more individual actually, which I come to at the end again. So in this person kind of, Lisa, I want to look nice so I can feel good about myself, and then others can see how I look. So for this participant, it was the way they looked that was clearly related to self-esteem. And they also focused on how others responded to how they looked. So it was about this idea of self-esteem becoming enmeshed into looks, and particularly how others see us. And I can see a good debate going on about whether men whether it's equal for men and women. But for me, it's this idea of self-esteem being based entirely on looks that I kind of find troubling, actually. Um, Maybe it's because I've never fitted into norms myself, but I've got a nice little question to do with this one. Okay, so again, this is anonymous, so nobody will know who you are. So how much do you worry about how others see you? So 4 is a lot, and 4 and 5 a lot, 1 and 2 is not very much. Yeah, so yeah, so at the moment, yep. Yeah, so some saying quite a lot, 1 or 2 saying not so much, but more people, the majority at the moment, are saying quite a lot. Yeah, and it varies. Yeah, that's actually interesting, isn't it? Because that does come back to, yeah, and I wonder if the older we get, that we worry less because we become more confident in who we are, and our self-esteem is based less on maybe you know, how we look or how others see us. But yeah, it's interesting. So the average is now 3.57, so just over halfway. Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, this idea of becoming a mother? So, you know, our bodies then just naturally don't conform to this idea of a thin waist, those of us that have had children, and it's quite natural, but we're still made to feel that we should have no stomach. Um, yeah, practical thing, definitely. So I can see lots of comments still going on. Yep, I guess we're looking for individual growth, people's points of view to take a back seat, confident, yeah, and unbothered. And that's really, you know, that's where we want to get to, hopefully. So numerous fitspiration videos linking fitness to body image, and actually some of my students have done their dissertations on looking at hashtags on fitspiration which aren't meant to be there, or eating disorders, which again they just change a few letters around and they can find these on Instagram and various other social media. So this quote, "Fitspiration, I cheated, but from afar no one can tell. 6% body fat actually, and dehydration isn't a joke. But dehydrated physique is the best after you get over the headaches." What do you think of that? Yeah, yeah, thinspiration. Yeah, it's kind of all part of the same, or it's similar. Yeah, thinspiration and fitspiration. So yeah, choosing looks over health, absolutely. So the healthy range of body fat for men is somewhere between 8 to 19%, some argue. Yep. And it's worrying that health is not is seen as less important than looks. For women, it's about 21 to 33%. Obviously, these are all, you know, it varies hugely with individuals as well. So they're putting themselves under, you know, an unsafe level of kind of, you know, body fat, and it can lead to heart issues, muscles can be impacted, bones can become brittle, testosterone levels can drop. And a female kind of Pinterest quote said, "The pain of being overweight is far worse than the pain of working out." You know, and again, for women, low body fat can affect reproduction and fertility. Yeah, and yeah, that social media is yes, and influences is I come on to in a minute as well. So yeah, the fit tea and, you know, Kardashians, but it is this you know, and this quote of, "There's no shortcut. It takes time to build a better, stronger version of yourself," which reminds me of so many adverts trying to get us to feel bad about ourselves, so that we have to either buy something, and in this case either do something to make ourselves feel better. So the fake images is next. Yeah, and harmful quotes, yeah, regarding thinspiration, yeah, absolutely. Which is on this slide. so so the images can challenge the filtered, and, you know, images can challenge filtered and edited images, as some people have said that, you know, you've got YouTubers who show their spots or, you know, whatever. So some argue that it reminds viewers that social media is fake and that comparisons should be avoided. And some research suggests that no makeup posts and things like that can help relieve some of these comparison effects. But there is disagreement about how impactful these are. And of course, it depends, as you've already said, on what people are engaging with and who they are following. Yes, and during, you know, lockdown particularly. So you can still find these inspiration posts on Instagram and the likes endorsing such images, which encourage comparisons and provides greater opportunities for these comparisons. And where self-esteem becomes connected with these comments and likes, encouraging self-surveillance in a kind of continual cycle, so people can become obsessed with their media images and the way they look on social media. So again, you know, all names have been changed, but Zara, who was 15, said, "I'll take lots of pictures and decide which one is best and go through the filters, and I want to get a lot of likes." So, you know, would take down pictures if they didn't get, you know, a lot of likes as well. So I have another little poll on this. Is it poll 8? Yeah, and keep commenting. Yes, because we're going to move on to influencers in a minute. So somebody said, I guess there's no... Oh, here we go. Do you follow influencers? I guess there's no gatekeeper. We can seek out harmful behaviors which reflect other social issues. So yeah, and yes, it's you know, we go and look and find things. Worrying, it's not just images. You can use filters and videos, change body shapes. Yeah, and some of you don't follow influencers, but some do. You know, so yeah, and those who are of bigger figures. So yeah, I'll come on to body positivity and the whole body positivity movement in a minute as well. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. So yeah, and some of you follow some influences are representative of real people in their bodies. So influences, okay, well the peer group plays an important role for individuals, and when yeah, and it can be positive and detract from, you know, or lessen. Buffer is the word that's often used in journal articles about the impact, you know, buffering the impact of social media. So when people follow specific celebrities and influencers online, it can encourage what's called parasocial relationships to form. Yeah, and I think this unfollowing is something I come onto at the end. So vloggers, YouTubers, Instagrammers even, and influencers are seen as more personal, credible, and easy to relate to. So what it does is it embeds these celebrities and influencers as part of our peer group. So it includes them alongside our friends and family. Like when I was talking to some of my students, one of them said that because an influencer was promoting tights that didn't snag, they went and bought them, and they said of course they snagged, and they, you know, after an hour they had hole, but they believed the influencer because they become part of our kind of peer group. So parasocial relationships it's called, that we develop with them. So individuals might feel greater pressure to continually monitor and evaluate themselves in a similar way to these influencers who have to continually, yeah, and music videos, continually maintain, monitor, and evaluate their self-brand, constantly reworking the self. So like some of these comments from Louise was, there's like celebrities on there on social media and you see them and you think, oh, I want to look like them. And Abigail said, I know that celebrities have like advert deal things with those tea brands that are meant to make you lose weight, and waist trainers. And of course, here you've got Khloe Kardashian, you know, advertising a particular brand, and you know, the tea that's been promoted to help you lose weight. Yes, I like that, following academics on Twitter. But it's this idea that you form this kind of friendship with them, so that you know who they are, that you trust them, that might influence people. And then we have body positivity. So images are more realistic, so it could lead to better downward or lateral, so similar comparison. And there are discourses such as body positivity, which can challenge these idealized images. And yeah. So I think it's more complex. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's more complex than simply having a positive effect, or, you know, negative effect as well. So some research suggests that disclaimer labels and posts might not have any positive effect on well-being and social comparison, whereas others found that supportive posts can buffer against body image concerns, as can strategies which highlight the artificiality of media images, so the ones with the no makeup posts and no filter posts and things like that. However, for me, it still places identity and self-esteem in relation to looks and body rather than how one is. So, this is where I really struggle with the whole idea of how one looks, because, you know, as a society, shouldn't we value what somebody's like as a person, you know, what they are, how they, you know, their morals, their virtue, if you like. Surely, you know, we should be valuing that so much more. Which maybe happens occasionally, you know, I'm thinking of Marcus Rushford. But, you know, it just seems so enmeshed into body and looks, which I have one more little poll. Yeah, exactly. We should be valuing the person, not the body. That's exactly kind of, you know, what I wanted to get across. I mean, yeah, any other comments about this one? I mean, some of my students say that, you know, body positivity is really helpful. It really helps them, and I'm not detracting from that. Yeah, and somebody's saying it's yeah, individuality. Those who demonize eating carbs, those who shame the low carb eaters to follow on because of a medical condition. Yeah, but it's not about how it looks. Yeah, and this is where there's the discourse. Yeah, rather than being about looks, medical discourse, you know, doing it for or eating a certain diet for health is completely different, isn't it? The reason why we don't is because we judge people by the way that they look without getting to know them. Yeah, and we do it in the, you know, interviews are a classic example. If you read the literature on interviews, when you go for an interview, somebody will have made up their mind within the first probably few minutes, or even less than that, I think it is, of looking at you as to whether you'll fit in. Yeah. And somebody said, considering how body looks centered social media is, this is better than nothing. Yeah, and the halo effect. Yeah, no, that is true actually. So the things that challenge it, and actually, I suppose that's what, if you like the look of someone, you assume they're a good person. Yeah, and that comes from, I think, or I think it comes from Aristotle actually, and this idea of virtue and beauty that were associated, and I think that's where it comes from. No, Greek philosophy particularly. However, let's see. I've become recently interested in, yeah, and kid stories, and yeah, it all reinforces it, doesn't it? You've got, I happen to see about 5 seconds or 5 minutes of Cinderella, I think, on TV, and yeah, of course, it's all stereotypical beauty, isn't it? The moral person, and you have it in Disney films, you know, where somebody who's morally you know, devious, they're portrayed as not fitting those beauty norms quite often. Yeah, and somebody's mentioned beautiful princesses and ugly witches. However, my research is yeah, and it's not a new phenomenon. No, it's not a new phenomenon, but it is one that is more prevalent because social media is so much a part of our everyday lives that we can expose ourselves to it, or indeed distance ourselves from it, actually, which is what I come on to next. But my research has been moving into looking at eating disorders. I've become part of a research group that that focuses, or part of a charity that focuses on recovery from eating disorders. And I've been doing some research with a charity who help people with who have all sorts of eating disorders and their carers as well. So the pressure, you know, this pressure to be thin and internalized, it's not beat, it's called Taste Life actually. I'll put it in the chat. But I have been to the Beat conference. But yeah, you know, there's anorexia, but orthorexia, which is the clean eating. You know, that nothing should be cooked, everything should be raw, etc. Bulimia, and so there's all sorts of kind of websites, groups that either are anti or pro these. Diet, you know, all sorts of dieting tips and dieting, you know, things you should and shouldn't do. So, and I think one of the things that I think is encouraging, because I've been quite negative up until now, is actually there are support groups for growing self-esteem, not based on appearance as well. Yeah, it's so some of the one of the participants with the focus groups, yeah, I like that. Eat my food after I've rolled it in mud. So one of the I did focus groups during the last kind of lockdown, actually in 2020, with this charity, and some of the kind of research from there is interesting in terms of so people did say that, you know, it's easy to look at the pictures on Instagram, Facebook, and look at the pictures and think you're really thin, and so they look at them and look through all their pictures and think they'll never be like that. However, what they did tend to do, and what I found was that actually, and what some of you have said here as well, is that actually that people tended to take time away from social media for a short while. So some of you said you don't go to those influencers or don't look at those social posts that you know are going to make you feel bad. And I think this is where it becomes really interesting, because it's about how we take control then of social media. So like Jared here said, I used to, but I haven't posted for like 3 years. I used to be really self-conscious back then. And you know, somebody from that eating disorders focus group said, I try to avoid going on it. I often click out of habit, but they try to avoid. So it's this idea that we don't have to take on board the ideologies that are presented to us. You know, this idea that comes from Stuart Hall, that we can engage with social media in a way that's oppositional to those images, if you like. So we can challenge that ideology, that discourse, those values, the beliefs about body image. And some of you have already done that, because you say, actually, I don't partake, or I don't, you know, my self-confidence and self-esteem doesn't come from how I look. So, however, I do think that the fact that there are so many kind of body images around on social media might make it harder to resist, particularly if it's subconscious, and particularly if we find ourselves in echo chambers. Yes, yeah, yeah, and Taste Life was, you know, all there were all sorts of people on these focus groups, not just anorexia. It was, you know, a whole mixture of people. So we can find ourselves in our echo chambers. So it depends on our individual circumstances, our disposition. Somebody mentioned age, you know, that maybe the age we're at, our perceptions of self, our self-surveillance. But we can actively choose what to engage in, I think, you know, particularly the support groups or more positive posts. And actually, some of the people who I talked to in those focus groups also found support groups that reinforced positive behaviors as well. So I think this is a kind of an interesting kind of area, and I've just got one more little poll. Well, actually, rather than the poll, I could put up. Let me put up the whiteboard again, because that's anonymous. Let me go to the whiteboard and share. So anyone can write on here. If you click on the T, and the text will come out. So either in the chat or in here, because I think that's pretty much an hour. Well, not quite an hour, but nearly. But that's really kind of where I want to leave it, actually, is this idea of yeah, as you know, this, or to have a discussion about this whole area of body image, because I do think these images dominate. As somebody said, it's hard to break the mindset, you know, the damage that's done to one's body, the shame we're meant to, you know, we're made to feel in terms of how we look if we don't conform to those norms. And in fact, when I did my PhD research in India, and at the time in India, they used to paint the actors and actresses in movies, you know, slightly bigger in real than they were in real life. However, that started to change as well, as you know, these images seem to circulate and dominate everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, and you know, these trends, and actually how one is as a person and health, you know, that surely they're you know, much more important, aren't they? Yeah, and cultural yes, definitely cultural stereotypes. How different look is always different. Yeah, it's interesting though, because I remember reading about uh, because of particularly because of some of the Western TV programs that were being filmed. So Rupert Murdoch's Star TV, for example, that actually it was changing the way people were wanting to look by being thinner in, you know, all sorts of other places as well. Yeah, yeah, and of course, yeah, you've got the whole the, you know, the white skin. So one of my students did their dissertation on skin whitening ads and things like this as well. So it's, you know, the whole kind of beauty stereotype for males and females is kind of one that's really hard to escape, I think. But any other comments? People don't seem to be writing on this one, so I'll share my poll instead and keep talking. Yeah, yeah, the whole, you know, the whole, it's a whole huge area, that, isn't it? The skin whitening products. So let me share the little Vivox poll for those that want to do anonymous comments. Here we go. And those that don't want to do it anonymously can put in the chat. Or indeed, I think when Charlotte says there's a Q&A at the end, there are some references as well in relation to this. So at the moment, I'm editing a book that hopefully will come out. When did we put it for? 2022, I think, July. I'm also writing an article with a colleague on gym culture and body image, because that's a whole nother area that I think is interesting. And this research on taste life, which crosses a whole host of things. So it's looking at eating disorders in relation to spirituality, which is a whole nother area that we haven't touched on. So yeah, any questions, comments, things you want to say, desperate to say?
It's been great how everyone has interacted so far. But if you do have any specific questions for Barbara, we do have a bit more time at the end if anyone wants to ask anything to do with the talk or around body image.
Yeah, I think I suppose the one of the kind of definitions of eating disorders that I've looked at is when things become compulsive. So I've looked at this in relation to engagement on social media, actually. So because when social media itself can become an addiction, and one of the classifications they use is when it becomes compulsive. So if you miss something off the plan, or you do something and you know, and that's the end of the world, it's you know, that kind of idea, I think. Ooh. Yeah, yeah, and it is sad, isn't it? So yeah, because we're made to feel shame if we don't conform to those norms. You know, I'm never made 5 foot, so you know, I'm never going to be that. Which actually, I was talking to somebody about this, and they said they compare themselves during lockdown a lot more because they see people who are similar to them. Yeah, no, there hasn't. There's been stuff written about, or I've certainly know about some of the literature on disabled bodies on TV programs and actors, but I haven't looked as much on social media. But influencers, maybe. I think there's some on that, but not as much. That's an interesting kind of point as well. Discourse comparing yourself to yourself. Yes. Oh yes, the progress pictures. Yeah, the before and after as well. Yeah, yeah. That is interesting as well. So it's, you know, what advertisers do, isn't it? You know, try this product and you'll look like this. It's kind of, we've almost internalized it. Yeah, once the results start appearing, it becomes addictive. Transformation Tuesday hashtag. Oh gosh, yeah. And it's this idea that it kind of is telling us that we're not good enough as we are, and we need to do something, isn't it? It's you know, it's designed to make us unhappy. But we can reject the ideology, is the good news. We can decide. And so, yes, it's like you aren't succeeding if you aren't changing. Yeah, it is, isn't it? And we change every 7 years anyway. You know, yeah, what's wrong with you as you are? Exactly. There's a common idea of we always have to be improving. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if this comes from a bit of neoliberal logic, actually. This idea that we're in competition with ourselves. Yeah, it is an ancient idea. I wonder if the kind of idea of the competitive spirit of neoliberal logic also kind of reinforces it, actually. Yeah, the self-improvement. Yeah, the oh, who was it? One of the Confucianist, I think, ideas is that you should be able to improve yourself through knowledge and education continually, although changing one's body is not to do with knowledge and education, but it is this notion of self-improvement, isn't it? Yeah, which is interesting. Any other comments, questions? See if there's anything on the board. Try many times to be healthy, but feel like I'm doing something to be too good. I'll eat a bag of crisps or a bar of chocolate. Yeah. Yeah, and actually that's the point, is, you know, a bar of chocolate or here and there is, you know, I eat a little piece of chocolate almost every day. You know, yes, and good and bad moral attachment to it. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's yeah, it becomes, yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Healthy can be occasional nice food. Food is food. Yeah. You aren't bad. Exactly. That's what I was trying to say, Laura. You aren't bad for eating chocolate. It is, but it becomes, you know, this association. Yeah. Yeah, bad every day. Yeah, me too. I eat a bit of chocolate every day, definitely. Um, but yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's you know, there's all sorts of rituals around food itself as well, not there, which are interesting. Yeah, I'm also addicted to chocolate. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because yes, and there is research saying that lockdown has definitely added more stress to body in also people with eating disorders. It's heightened it as well. It's hard when health discourses can be used to justify weight loss. Yes, yeah, and it you know, you have this going on in the media, don't you? Definitely. Yeah. And this is what I was going to say, actually, is that how one looks doesn't necessarily equate to health. So the one who had 6% body fat, you know, um, and I remember when I used to try and run, and I was absolutely rubbish and extremely unfit, but nobody would have known because I just, you know, I just looked okay, basically, according to those conventions, but I was very unfit and smoked a lot. And on Channel 4, there are so many programs where they trial diets. Yeah, yeah, and you know, all these makeover programs do the same. Fitness fads, yeah. The ones where they show how terrible they are and how ridiculous, you know, super size versus super skinny. Yeah, yeah, it is, isn't it? It's 10 years younger in 10 days. Yes, and this whole thing of age, you know, that you have to be young, because obviously the stereotype is young and, you know, that young and beautiful. When you're old like me, you know, you're no longer, you can't be beautiful. It's yeah, a whole fascinating kind of area of study, really.
If we don't have any more comments or questions coming through, I just need to say a few things in closing, since we've already lost a number of people from the audience already. That was absolutely fascinating, Barbara. It's a topic that I'm very interested in as well, so I've really enjoyed listening to you talk about it and seeing people's opinions on the polls. I hope everyone else has enjoyed today's session as well. And I just want to say, if you do want any further information about University Centre Halesowen or studying HE at Halesowen College or University of Worcester, you can contact myself on lsummers@halesowen.ac.uk. You will receive an email after this event with a feedback form. If you can complete that, that really helps us improve our events as they're going forward. And included in that will also be the recording of this session. It's been recorded and it will be available on YouTube in the near future. I can't say exactly when. It depends on how long it takes me to put it up. Our next event in March is a pre-recorded event. It won't be live like this one, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. It's going to be an interview between Dr. Trish O'Connell and author Rachel Edwards about her latest psychological thriller, Darling. Rachel's appeared in many lists, including Promising British Novelists, Best Books by BME Authors, and Bernadette Evaristo's Top 20 Best Reads by Black British Women in 2019. To be in with a chance of being like one of the first to watch the interview, then you can sign up to our mailing list. At the end of the survey, there is a section to put your email address, or you can email in response to your Eventbrite emails, or you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, as many people have, you can leave the talk by going to the top left screen with the 3 lines, and leaving the session is the bottom option. Thank you for coming.